Hello, BookTube. I started out this week going to the Brattle Bookshop because Aaron Facer was taunting me to do so. But then I started really enjoying what I was finding, and it's always fun to go to the shop, and so even when the taunting stopped, I kept going, and I went back today. You might think, well, surely if you've been there every day, except for the one rainy day, there's nothing for you to find? No, no, there's tons of stuff to find. Not only is the Brattle constantly changing their stock, they're always bringing stuff up from the basement, they're always out buying, but also, and also there's the fact that if you look at these books thousands of them at a time, your eyes are going to miss things. There's also just things that are in little nooks and crannies that you don't spot the first time, and also maybe your interest shifts a little based on something that you've read recently or some BookTube event that's coming up. So I once again have a pile of books to show you. We'll start off with mass market paperbacks. The first two mass market paperbacks are unlike the others. The first one is in this beautiful condition paperback of Robert Penn Warren's great novel, All the King's Men. With I mean, the spine is a little bit creased. Somebody obviously read this, but they kept it in excellent condition. And this isn't made anymore, of course. This mass market paperback is not made anymore. And also, the book itself has been adulterated. Its brand, if you want to call it that, has been adulterated for decades now because the publisher decided in the 90s to issue a second version of this book, a version where Maxwell Perkins' edits are either not present or hardly present at all. I think it's called Oh Lost or something like that. It's not something that you should do or that you should be allowed to do. All the King's Men is a classic in the exact period that I have been talking about, from the end of World War II to the end of the American experiment, 1945 to 2025. That discrete period. This came out right at the beginning of that period and is one of the two great American novels of politics. It's fantastic. I'm long overdue for a reread, long overdue. And I found a perfect condition mass market paperback of it. Then this next one, there's a BookTube event that prompted it, but not the BookTube event that you might think. The BookTube event that has been with me nonstop every day at the shop. There are other BookTube events besides June on the Range. There is, for instance, Garb August, which comes up in August and which deals with reading trash. And I don't know for sure that this book that I found is trash, but I'm thinking that it is. This, first of all, it's numbered. That's usually a dead giveaway. It has a cheesy 70s photo cover. That's also usually a dead giveaway. This is by Alan Rieffe, and it's called The Lady Killers. It's Cage #1. And I looked at this cover originally and I thought, oh, that's kind of a weird, why would you make a cover like that? Is this some sort of cheap photo effect? But no, it turns out the book is about identical twins, which ought to be another dead giveaway for Garb August. One of these twins is a super sexy PI, but he has an identical twin brother. And nobody knows that, which allows them to pull all sorts of switcheroos, I guess. I've never read any of these things. I have no idea what kind of a pseudonym this is, and I have no idea how many there are in this series. This one, who is Huntington Cage, anyway? To the New York cops, he's the youngest, hippest private eye on the beat. To every mobster in Manhattan, he's an awesome foe, a fearless crime buster who seems to be everywhere at once. He does, babe. He seems to be everywhere at once. That was my girl. Do you want to come down here? Here you go. Feet of yoga. Ooh. Ooh. Stretch those glutes. But what no one knows is that Hunt Cage is two men in one. For Hunt has a secret identical twin, and Hadley Cage is every bit as danger-loving as his famous brother. I did not check to see if there were any other Cage novels. I just grabbed Cage #1. I'm thinking it will do for Garb August. But When it comes to booktube events, apparently when it comes to booktube events and my bookstore, the one that rules them all is June on the Range, which is right around the corner. June on the Range is a June booktube event about reading westerns, western novels. Here, let's block that there. And every time that I've gone to the Brattle lately, I have found westerns, but not just any westerns. I have found Louis L'Amour westerns, Louis L'Amour paperbacks. Of course, Louis L'Amour is the best-selling western author of them all, and also, I would argue, one of the best-selling authors, period, in the English language. And his backlog of paperbacks, these dime store paperbacks that you can read practically in one sitting. You'll get good guys, you'll get bad guys, you'll get a mile-wide divide between those two. This is not Elmore Leonard. And you'll get usually a ripping good story of some kind or another. Because that body of mass-market paperbacks has been so popular, the whole of it has been reprinted many times. It's always weird to me to think, but it's true that we have lived through the very last mass-market paperback reprint line of Louis L'Amour. It used to be that every 15 years or so, as an avid buyer of books in stores or as a bookseller, every 10 or 15 years, I would think, I wonder what the next design of Louis L'Amour will be. I wonder what the next design will look like. And it's weird to think that I'm never going to need to wonder that again. That is just very strange. But I've had a bunch of Louis L'Amour at the Brattle this morning, which is more and more increasingly making me think that I'm going to do a lot of reading of this author for June on the Range, which was not my original plan. I have a whole bunch of westerns. That was going to be my original plan, but... so anyway, I found The Shadow Riders, and here you have a custom cover that is meant to look like the star of the show, Tom Selleck, who is there with the author. I don't think I've ever seen the Tom Selleck Shadow Riders production, and I don't know off the top of my head if I've ever read the book. I'm usually pretty good with that sort of thing, with authors that have written an enormous number of books. I know I've talked to a lot of readers about murder mysteries or cheesy shoot-'em-up science fiction, like what we're going to cover for Rocket Summer, and also especially westerns, and also especially Louis L'Amour westerns. I've talked to a lot of people over the decades who just freely admit, I've read so many of these things that I honestly don't remember if I've read this, that, or the other one. None of them stands out because they are written mainly with the main selling point that they are not any different from each other. I'm usually pretty good with differentiating that, but when it comes to Louis L'Amour, I don't remember if I've read The Shadow Riders. I don't remember. But that's one design. Here we have another design. This is Kilkenny, which we've already seen on this channel, but this is a different design. Right here you have the gigantic logo as the author's name, not the... and you've got this weird kind of filigree to set off the title. No idea if all of Louis L'Amour was done in this format. I don't have any idea. Then we have these. I have a couple of these that I've shown you already. They got the publishers of Louis L'Amour got a different cover artist, a couple of different cover artists, and they decided to set them in a little inset on the cover. This is the Californios. And you see, you've got this a little more dignified a setting there, where you've got the illustration in the middle, not interfering with the title or the author. Don't know quite what I prefer here, but we have another one of these. This is Hanging Woman Creek. I believe, unless I'm very much mistaken, that is the only black man ever to appear on a Louis L'Amour cover. Certainly, when it comes to this setup, I don't know anything about this book. If I've read it, I'm going to need to reread it to find out. And finally, yet another design. So we've had, 3 or 4 designs here. This is Guns of the Timberlands, and this is a completely different look. That might even be a photograph. Or certainly a painting taken from a photograph. But here you have a different type font, different lettering, set up in a different way. It's not encircling or enhancing the title. It's just way up here. So you get different eras for when these things came out. That's a lot more Louis L'Amour. So I now have a little stack of these things, and I'm wondering if that means that I'm going to be reading Louis L'Amour almost exclusively for June on the Range and just let the others wait. Let everything else wait. That seems like a shame. That seems like a real shame, but it's a possibility. Then what else have we got here? Okay, the rest are all hardcovers, and they're not Louis L'Amour. There's one paperback. This first one is Charles McLaurin, and this I'm trying to find the date when this came out. 1925, so a century ago. This is Mere Mortals. No dust jacket. I don't plan on keeping this. I have a feeling that my reading of it will destroy it. But this is medical mysteries throughout history, which always intrigues me. Anything like that intrigues me. The author looks at figures in history. King Henry VIII, Queen Elizabeth I, Samuel Johnson. He looks at figures in history and tries to pinpoint what we know about them medically and what we can guess about them medically. I think that's just fascinating. Of course, the medicine here is a century out of date, but I don't know how much of a difference that's going to make. And then the final chapter, let me see if I can get to the table of contents here. There's one on Spinoza. There's a chapter on Spinoza here. There's one on Schopenhauer. There's one on Nietzsche. That should be interesting reading. But then there's one of the chapters in here is Some Epidemics of Social Importance. I don't know what that means. I wonder if this will be one of those rare books that actually talks about the Spanish flu epidemic that ravaged the world just a little bit before this book came out. I wonder if it'll be able to will actually talk about that. It's fascinating. I admit, probably for lurid reasons, I will turn to Nietzsche first, but I will read all the others happily. That kind of speculation always gets to me. Then we have a hardcover that I've shown on this channel many times before. I absolutely adore the book. I did a read-along, a buddy read on this channel. This is Brideshead Revisited by Lenoir. And this is the cover that I like the most of all the versions that I've seen. I have a sentimental attachment to the old paperback that had characters from the TV miniseries. I have a sentimental attachment to that, and I, of course, have a copy of that, but it's not strong enough to take a read. This little hardcover is. It's nice and light, made with rationing paper and whatnot, and it gives pride of place to the giant fountain that plays such a pivotal role in a couple of scenes in the first part of this book. Somebody put a plastic covering over this, and that dot is underneath the plastic covering. I am assuming that the original owner of this book was a used bookstore and put a price up there in indelible marker of some kind or another, and is right now roasting in hell for that. And that the second owner of the book saw that, wanted to put a covering over the thing, and didn't want the price tag to be immortalized, so they put that sticker on there instead. And then put the cover on it. And if I'm right about all of that, well, I appreciate the care, but I don't want the sticker. I don't want either the sticker or the price. So I will very carefully, I don't know how possible it will be, I will very carefully take this thing out of this plastic covering and see what I can do with that. See if maybe there's a way to get rid of whatever's underneath that sticker. But I'm very happy to have this. I had this exact version that a couple of years ago that did not survive the buddy read that I did, the read-along that I did of it. So now I have another one, which is great. Then we have something, this one is also a little bit messy. I will have to clean this up. But this is Louis Auchincloss, who was he would fall into that category that I'm talking about, that period that I'm talking about, from 1945 to 2025. He would fall in that period. He wrote a lot of stuff, and was a lawyer, was also an editor, was really a poetic gray eminence out on the horizon there in New York literary circles. It's never hard to find an Auchincloss novel or two or three or four in the Brattle sale lot for $1. That's almost a perennial thing. And I have read them from time to time. I have right now, I have one hardcover anthology of, I think, 4 of his novels, 3 or 4 of his novels. I read all of his novels as they were coming out. Didn't think there was much to them. Really didn't think there was much to them. And I periodically go back to them because I keep thinking, is it possible that I'm missing something here? I don't think I am. No one has ever said about an Auchincloss novel. No one has ever said that there's anything to this. So the idea that I'm reading them and thinking there's not much to this, I don't know that I'm betraying anything there, but it bugs me anyway. Who is this guy? What is this phenomenon of him? I don't have any idea. And I keep meaning to find out. But I found a book today, a slim book of his today, that I would have grabbed anyway. That I'm going to want anyway, regardless of whether or not I ever become in sync with his fiction. And that is this. The Man Behind the Book. There is our author right there. And this is a slim collection of literary profiles, literary prefaces, that sort of thing. So you have a new anthology of some short stories of F. Scott Fitzgerald or Mavis Gallant or whatever, and you want him to write the introduction, okay, then he will do that. And that's all this is. It's just those. And that is bound to please me in a way that maybe his fiction does not. So we've got, who have we got here? Anne Bronte, Walter Pater, Henry James, Sarah Orne Jewett, F. Marion Crawford. That'll be interesting because that author doesn't exist anymore. Amy Lowell, Compton Burnett, Harold Nicholson. A whole bunch of figures, minor and major here, that I'm sure that I don't, and I haven't read all the pieces here. The only way that I've read any of these is if I have the book, if I have the book under examination that has his preface. Otherwise, no. So there'll be a lot in here that's new to me. And that's fantastic. Very much looking forward to it. Won't take any time at all to just blow my way through here. And who knows? He might recommend one of these authors or one of these books in a way that will make me want to find it or reconsider it. Then next we have a UK trade paperback. It's got a dumb sticker on it that I will carefully remove. This is the historian Anthony Beevor, and he wrote a big book on D-Day. And that's, I found the UK trade paperback of his big book on D-Day. With this thing on it that I will have to very gently get that off there. I don't want that staying on there. But I love UK trade paperbacks. I don't have this particular version. This author is extremely prolific. I'm sure that I've read this. I would have read the American edition, but I'm sure that I've read this. I don't. The breathless burb on the cover is Beevor can be credited with single-handedly transforming the reputation of military history. That is absolutely not true. But I do find him entertaining. He's one-trick pony. He writes these kinds of things in only one way, which is from the grunt up. And it just checks back in with a core cast of non-entities, with a core cast of characters who are not the movers and shakers of the event, but rather the forgotten people. He ransacks their diaries and their journals and whatnot to give you a grunt's eye view of most of what he writes about, and does it well. He does it well. It makes it an interesting story. So I'll gladly give this a reread. I don't know that I have any Beevor right now in physical print and paper format, but I saw this. I can seldom turn down a UK trade paperback. That seldom happens. And then this last one that I found, I don't know if it counts as the find of the day. I love it, but I've never read it. So we've got a little riddle session going on here. This is The Mysterious William Shakespeare by Charlton Ogburn. But this is the second edition. So it's lighter than the first edition. It's physically brighter. The first edition is dark browns and blacks. This is white. And I don't actually, as soon as I saw it, I realized I don't actually know what the difference is between the first edition and the second edition. I don't know how much Charlton Ogburn added or subtracted from the one to the other. I imagine that there's a note in here that gives a strong indication of that. But I love the first edition that I read. I love the one that's all browns and blacks. I absolutely love it. This is Charlton Ogburn going at the Shakespeare authorship controversy, really becoming a founding pillar of that controversy by first tearing apart the idea that the man William Shakespeare from Stratford-on-Avon wrote the plays and poems that we attribute to him, and then building up the Earl of Oxford, Edward de Vere, as the person who did, based largely on a staggering number of coincidences between the Earl's life and the events in the plays. a staggering number of extremely specific coincidences that have struck people inquiring into this subject as downright odd for a long time. Not all loonies with tinfoil hats either. Orson Welles, for instance, although never actually plunked down his change for any one candidate for being Shakespeare, he said that if you don't think that the plays were written by the Earl of Oxford, then you've got some mighty strange coincidences to explain away. And how are you going to do that? You have to do that. You have to explain those coincidences away. And Orson Welles couldn't think of a way to do that. He was a hell of a lot smarter than I was, a hell of a lot smarter than you are. So I don't know that I can. But I still caution against the unbelievable temptation when you do a book like this to put forward an alternate candidate. If you don't do that, you're on a lot more solid ground. And for a huge chunk of this book, Charlton Ogburn does not care to do that. He does eventually get around to it, but for a huge chunk of this book, he just goes at the idea of Shakespearean authorship. He just tears that apart in every way, from every direction. A large chunk of the reason why Shakespeare scholars dismiss Edward de Vere as the author of the plays is because Edward de Vere died too early. Well, what does that depend on? The dating of the plays. We know when Edward de Vere died. How do you rule him out as author based on the fact that he died too early? You do that by setting up a chronology for when the plays were produced, for when they would have been written. If that chronology is wobbly or fake, well, then Edward de Vere is back in the running. Ogburn also goes at the gigantic, gaping holes in the story of William Shakespeare, the author. Other Shakespearean proponents or proponents of the Shakespearean authorship controversy have gone through this same thing with varying degrees of tinfoil hat looniness involved. They've gone at it the same thing. Charlton Ogburn was definitely not insane. He was definitely not a tinfoil hat wearing kook. And he knows his subject. And he's also eloquent. This is such a wonderfully readable book. I don't know about the second edition. I don't know how thoroughly he went through it. But whether or not you believe that Edward de Vere, who's that other guy on the cover, whether or not you believe that Edward de Vere wrote the plays, you're going to have a hard time believing that the man from Stratford wrote the plays after you read this book. Charlton Ogburn goes through all of the usual caveats, the caveats that existed for centuries, the caveats that Mark Twain famously put into charge sheet form, that no one knows or can prove that the man from Stratford ever went to school. As far as anyone knows or can prove, the man from Stratford could not read. His parents couldn't. His children couldn't. As far as anyone knows or can prove, the man from Stratford never left England. Certainly never traveled extensively on the continent. Was never a soldier with soldier talk. Never a doctor with doctor talk. Never a lawyer with lawyer talk. As far as anyone knows or can prove, the man from Stratford-on-Avon was never any of those things. Never did or knew any of that. Never had any way of knowing about, never had an education. As far as anyone knows or can prove, this person did not ever get an education. Much less an education in Greek and Latin that followed its way into minor third-tier Roman and Greek authors who are quoted in the plays. The plays are obviously the production of an extremely learned gentleman of letters. And the man from Stratford was not an extremely literate gentleman of letters. We don't know much about him, but we certainly know that. It's a gigantic mess. You are automatically shunted into crackpot territory if you say it, but it's a gigantic mess. It's a mess the like of which does not exist anywhere else in literature, especially not when you compare what you're being asked to credit into that gap of surmises. Of course, when you're dealing with historical reconstruction before the modern era, there is always surmising involved. Charlton Ogburn is the first person to admit that, with Ben Jonson or Christopher Marlowe or in later generation Aphra Behn. There are things you have to surmise, but we're talking about a corpus of work that is considered the greatest body of literature in any language at any point in the entire history of the human race. And on the opposite side of that chart sheet, you have a virtual nonentity, someone who is virtually not there. Ogburn does a great job teasing that out, teasing out all of it. Why do you say that you know this particular thing about the author William Shakespeare? Here's the proof that you don't know that. Why do you say that you know this particular thing about when Macbeth was written? Well, here is the reasoning why that might not be true. And if Macbeth was written 10 years earlier than we think it was, then Edward de Vere could have written it. And the man who we know as William Shakespeare could not possibly have written it. It's just fascinating. I love it. I love the subject. I just think it is I always talk on this channel about how one of the elements of biography and history that I most love is that people are always tempted to revisionism. We think we know this about the 100 Years' War. All right, well, I've got a new theory, and I think the facts fit it. Here's my book. I'm going to try and convince you about the 100 Years' War, or the Great San Francisco Earthquake, or whether or not there was a historical Jesus Christ. I have a theory about that, and I have scanned all the evidence. Now I'm going to try and convince you of my theory. I love that. I love it when history and biography do that. Just love it. And this is more fun along those lines than anything else. And as far as I'm concerned, than any other example of that phenomenon in history and biography. Because, as proponents of the Shakespeare authorship question always say, they always try to remind their rabid Stratfordian detractors, we're all only doing this because we love the works of this author, regardless of who he was. We love the works of this author. That is why that makes this so much fun. And of course, the orthodoxy is right there. 2 long poems with Shakespeare's name on them. The connection between the man from Stratford-on-Avon and the London theater world is absolutely and violently documented. And it's not a great leap from there. Whereas the theory that the man from Stratford, who was a grain merchant, ever had a connection with the theater world in London is a little bit stretched. So the point I'm trying to make is that you can just say William Shakespeare wrote the works that bear his name. Ben Jonson attested to it. There are records that attest to it. It has been a standard accepted bit of literary folklore for 500 years. Okay, fine. And then you go and read the works, and you go and see them when they're put on in your town, and you have a great time. Fine, fantastic. No harm, no foul. Taught that way in schools, no danger of ever not being taught that way in schools. $1 million industry in England, you're set. But if you want to have the fun of wondering whether or not any of that is true, well, that's you get that too. It's literally the best of both worlds. You're not hurting anybody by pursuing this kind of thing, and I love doing it. But I'm very curious to see what differences there are in the second edition. So I grabbed it right away. Now, the only other point I want to make here is about this particular weird book. I brought this up months and months ago. I was rereading The Mysterious William Shakespeare in the old edition, and I talk about it periodically on this channel. And I think I remember, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think I remember that one of you emailed and said that you'll have to enjoy that book vicariously because it's extremely expensive to buy secondhand online. I don't know if that's true. I can't imagine that it would be. But if I don't notice a huge difference, if there isn't a huge difference between this volume and the other volume, then we can do a giveaway. Because I don't need 2 copies of this. Unless this is significantly different, I don't need both. So that if one of you is interested and have a hard time getting that, I can just send it to you. But I want to check first and see. So there you go. That was yet another trip to the Brattle. A week of trips to the Brattle, except for the one day when it was raining. It's going to be raining tomorrow morning, too. So we have The Mysterious Mr. Shakespeare, or The Mysterious William Shakespeare by Charlton Ogden, the second edition. We have D-Day by Anthony Beevor. We have The Man Behind the Book by Louis Auchincloss, with this stuff all over here that I will get off it. I will clean this up. We have Brideshead Revisited in my favorite edition, this little hardcover. We have Mere Mortals by C. McLaurin. What was actually wrong with Charles II? As if anybody could know that. Then a bunch of Louis L'Amour. We have Guns of the Timberlost, Hanging Woman Creek, The Californios, Kilkenny, and The Shadow Riders with Tom Selleck on the cover. And then Lady Killers, Cage #1, about the identical twin Cage brothers. And finally, All the King's Men by Robert Penn Warren in a mass market paperback. So that's yet another Brattle visit. Aaron Facer could not possibly have known the avalanche that he was creating by dislodging one little pebble. But I'm not going to the Brattle tomorrow. I'm not doing that. So this will do for the week, and then we'll see what shape next week takes. Anyway, I'll wrap this up for now, but I'll be back. Thank you, BookTube.